Hello, everyone. This is Tim. Welcome to North and South Podcasts. This is a Hope Street podcast, and today I am speaking to Claire Berry, who is a comedian from the Liverpool Northwest area, and she came along to a Hope Street meeting a few months ago, and she's been on a bit of a journey recently, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. So this is a wellbeing podcast. We're going to talk about ADHD today, which is something that you've probably heard about. So Claire, thanks for joining us today to talk about ADHD. So do you want to just introduce yourself? You do comedy. How does that work?
I didn't start until I was 47. So, and it just been, I think, something I've always sort of been a bit involved with performing arts and writing and stuff like that, and something I'd wanted to try out. So I just sort of gig locally or wherever I can. I just started running my own night, and then I do other stuff as well. Like I write. I've just started doing a tour guide job as well. So there's lots of little bits and bobs that I do. But yeah, obviously my comedy, trying to keep skewing it.
Do you think that there's a bit of a crossover between the kind of well-being issues that we're going to discuss around ADHD and creativity? Do you think, because I'm quite a creative person, and I think if you've got a creative mind, you're a little bit more open and sensitive to things. Is that your experience?
Definitely. I mean, you know, like my creativity has just been such a big part of any of my sort of healing journey and my mental health, whether that's been through writing poetry, performing poetry, doing visual art, doing stand-up. It's like a really important thing for me. When I started looking at the ADHD journey, I had quite an interesting conversation with a friend of mine who I would definitely say is like neurotypical. Yeah. And I was talking about some of the things that started to make me wonder about ADD. And so I don't have the H bit, but it's kind of and she, oh God, I'm so sorry about the, I don't know whether you can hear that in the background.
Yeah, the psychedelic ice cream van in the background.
It's like, it sounds like it's coming actually through in the house when he's by the window. And I remember her sort of saying, she said, yeah, but I just see you as this kind of like creative who's doing, I'm going to do this and this and this and this, and this is going on and this is going on. And this kind of like living in this like sort of chaos around me, and kind of having this quite sort of jumping from all these different things and all these different ideas. And I said to her, yeah, that would be great if I was having a good time. But it's not. There's a lot of like not good time with it, because I, constantly overwhelmed, constantly struggling to keep on top of like just things that seem so normal for other people, just buried in it. And that being just absolutely exhausting to sort of, like sort of on a daily basis feel like you're living in that fairground thing with the hammers where you're popping the things down. Yeah. And it's like, people can feel like that sometimes, but when you just feel like it all the time, it's incredibly wearing. And that's
something I can relate to. I think John Lennon said it as well. He said, when you're a creative, he said, you're miserable because you've got a creative mind. And he said, it's almost like the price of it. I mean, you look at Mozart, who people say today, Mozart was autistic. And he was writing like operas and symphonies when he was 4 or something like that. And you look at like Isaac Newton apparently used to wake up in the morning and just sit there and think for 2 hours before he got up with all these weird ideas. Again, many people say in the modern world he'd be diagnosed as being, neurodiverse, as it were. And you mentioned the word neurotypical there, and this is something that paradigms are shifting all the time, and we are becoming increasingly aware of the idea that 1 in 7, 1 in 10 people might be neurodiverse. ADHD in the UK, officially it's meant to be at around 3-4%, but we're talking up to 10% of people who might be described as autistic, ADHD, neurodiverse, who just experience the world differently. And what you said there about everyday life and everyday normal things being difficult, I feel like that's been my life all the way through my life. And as much as I try to ameliorate that by investigating the potential of ADHD, all of a sudden that explains it all in a way which I go, oh my God, I listened to a great podcast, which I'll put up at the end, called ADHD for Adults. I'll put it in the notes. And yesterday I was listening to a podcast and there was a woman speaking and she said something which I've never, ever heard said before. And I went, oh my God, that is me. That is me. And she's got ADHD and she's just described something. And I thought, wow, I thought I was just weird or there was something wrong with me, but she actually described it. Now, we're at different parts in this journey because you've been diagnosed, technically.
Yeah.
I phoned my GP 3 months ago and said, listen, I want to be tested and I've got to wait another 9 months. It's like a self-referral process. And I haven't been diagnosed or anything like that, but I've started to look into it and listen to podcasts and stuff. But the pain I experience day to day doing normal things is very hard. And I think you just described that like apparently normal things that require in the ADHD world something called executive function, which is the ability to be above the melee and make strategic decision making. We find very difficult. Does that kind of tally with what you just said, do you think?
Definitely. I mean, I think it's complicated by the fact that I am also like CPTSD diagnosed. I did like when I didn't get a kind of, I actually got a diagnosis of borderline when I was 40, which then was changed. The second psych I had changed it to CPTSD, but this wasn't until like my 40s. And obviously that also has a massive impact on executive functioning as well.
What's the C part? A lot of people might know PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, complex, as
complex
in it's kind
post-traumatic
of
stress disorder.
As in, you've had like repetitive sort of long-term traumas that then it's harder to kind of, there's not like one specific trauma that you can sort of manage. It's sort of, so it just causes a lot more sort of complicated symptoms and long term. And so I mean, like my mental health has been bad, I would probably say since a young child, but sort of noticeably since I was sort of 13, and a lot of trauma happened to me in those years as well. So I've sort of, what's happened over the years is like I finally had it acknowledged that this is more than just like anxiety and depression. That there was a sort of acknowledgement that there was something sort of bigger going on, and then that gave me some sort of framework to explain certain things. But there's always been things that I thought still doesn't quite explain everything. I think sort of like it's like putting this like jigsaw together, and trying to make sense of all of that. The sort of ADD, on top of the CPTSD. I mean, it's like I actually started having a go, a little bit of stand up around mental health. It's funnily enough, I've not explored that hugely. It's been there in my mind, but I was just sort of, I was saying, like, I sort of had a little, like, just try out in this little club, and I was talking about, do you remember the on the BBC many years ago, you used to have the girl with the noughts and crosses when the telly was off, and I was saying that's my executive functioning. It's just offline. It's just offline. And like in terms of when I was at school, I mean, I didn't come out of school with anything really. I came out of like one GCSE at sea. I was completely disengaged. I couldn't understand anything. It was like I just couldn't understand or grasp things that I look back now and I think, why could I not grasp that? And then having a sort of almost like an experience of sort of cognitive dissonance, of sort of coming out of school being treated as just like a thicko that didn't, was in all the low sets, you're not going to achieve anything. And then going to university later in life, and I remember one of the biggest things was I was doing sort of creative writing, but I also did like cultural studies. And I absolutely loved it. Like I remember philosophy classes, I had my hand up all the time. I was like, da, 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 and getting all these like firsts. And I was like, but I can't out like almost my brain not being able to manage the gap of well, how come I can do this? How come I can talk about philosophy and write essays on philosophy, but I couldn't do my times table. I didn't know the difference between a verb and a noun. Like school, like my my sort of ability to grasp anything, and then that obviously impacting my self-esteem even more. And it's just such an awful vicious circle. But in a way, when I think now about like neurodivergence, and I'm only in my early days of understanding it, it's like it is like things like philosophy, like a bigger concept, picture, creative thinking, or creative writing. Like for me, that's all in the same sort of realm, sort of functional, structured. Like me trying to plan a holiday fills me with absolute terror. Do you know what I mean? Like my daughter keeps saying to me, "Can we go abroad?" And I feel really sad because I've sort of got to this point where the idea for me of getting the passports, filling the passport forms in, trying to work out how to organize a holiday, like the task that feels such an overwhelming task for me, that I've almost put it to bed because I just think I just can't seem to do that.
I think that there's a concept, isn't it, in terms of ADD, attention deficit and attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. Now, there's a notion that ADHD is just people who can't concentrate and who fidget a lot. And that can be one part of the picture. I would say I have trouble doing both of those things.
Okay.
But there's something called the ADHD iceberg, which I'll see if I can find a link for it to put it on the in the podcast notes. But you then get all these other things that go with it. Now, all my life I've had issues with anxiety. All my life I've had issues with anxiety, might be OCD, social anxiety, that kind of thing. From 29, I got depression. But I've always found impulsive behavior hard to regulate. And I've always been a creative trying to fit into a straitjacketed world. And I once heard, I think it was Jordan Peterson, actually. I don't really like his politics, but I heard him say once, like, to put a creative in a room where they're not being creative, you can actually experience pain. And right through school, I would say you had a bad experience at school. And I did as well, by the way, but I got decent qualifications out of it. And you might say I had highly functioning ADHD, if that's one way of describing it. There's different types, etc. So I got by and I did okay at school. But for me, maths lessons were like being boiled alive. And I remember the hour of a maths lesson. I can still remember year 8 in school, Friday afternoon, I had maths. And I hated, I don't swear on this podcast, so I'm not going to start swearing now, but I hated every second of that lesson. And I'm like you, I love philosophy. I'm very much into the humanities, expression, creativity, poetry. I write poetry. I like to write. People say I've got a bit of a mad sense of humor, which is great. I love it, I like that. But for me, nonsense, I can't tolerate it. It's another universe to me. And executive function, the ability to executively function. You've just said there about going on holiday. I went to Scotland with my son for a few days. And the stress that caused me, planning it, going, you start to say to yourself, is this worth it because of the executive functional stress? Now, I want to keep testing myself and I don't want to give up on things, but it does hurt us. These apparently normal things, they really hurt us. And when I get bored, it's not boredom like, oh, this is a bit boring. It's like an existential thing to me. It's like, oh my God, this is so boring and I'm hating every second of it. It almost becomes like an existential thing, like a fight or flight response. Like I want to get away from it. And certain things which normal people do and society does, I'm doing lots of like speech marks with my fingers here, folks. It's another universe to me and I don't like it. I just don't like it, and I find it really hard to do that. So I've got strengths and I've got weaknesses, and since exploring ADHD more, because being told I had anxiety and depression, I thought, yeah, that's right, but there's still something else here that I can't explain. And I think ADHD, it can be all things to all people, and we need to be careful. You can go, oh, that's ADHD, that's ADHD, that's, life's not like that. But it does empower one to say, I know that I am good at this, and I know that I'm not good at that. And I'm going to tell the person, and I'm going to tell my boss, and I'm going to tell the people I live with that I'm not good at that. And that is empowering. And I feel your pain there, because it's something that just grinds against me sometimes, the way I view the world and the way the world seems to want me to behave. And I find that very hard. What kind of symptoms did you feel led you to the diagnosis then? What was your kind of journey of, right, I've got ADHD and I'm going to go and investigate that? You've already said that there was anxiety and depression, but do you want to explain a bit more?
Yeah, I think, like I say, like sometimes I've sort of, had this sort of CPTSD, but I think it doesn't fit with everything. And then it was actually a really random little Google search out of a day of utter frustration of just like people who lose things all the time. That's what I Googled. And like my level of, like, people lose things, but I mean, it's just on an exhausting level. And and I think I must have been having one of those days. And like, I mean, I have lost Christmas presents, shopping, like just walk off from a bus stop and leave it all. And like, I was telling my friend, I'm slightly going off on one, but I'll come back. Like, because these days I'm so anxious if I've got more than 2 bags on me that aren't physically attached to me, that because I know what I'll do. I'll sit down for a coffee, my head will go somewhere else, and I'll just walk off. And I've lost so many things. And in the house, it's just like that all the time, like constantly looking for things. And it's like when I go out now, if I've got carrier bags, I make sure I've got a rucksack so I can't take it off. My handbag over like that way, so I can't take that off. And then if I sit for a coffee, I have to physically put bags in between my legs so I can feel them. Or try and attach the plastic bit onto my wrist, so that I don't just walk off and leave it. And all of that is quite knackering as well, because you constantly know that you forget these things. So it's continual, like that creates a lot of anxiety. And so I just Googled randomly like losing things and came up with the ADHD. And I thought, that's weird, because obviously my perception of ADHD had been crazy boys running around throwing chairs. I couldn't, and I was kind of like, so I kind of looked at it and I thought, God, that's like, when I sort of related to a lot of the other stuff in it. And then I sort of, you go down those sort of rabbit holes, and I just ended up watching this video just randomly again, like, I didn't think that much of it at the time, but then I looked at this video and there's this woman and she described it and I went, oh my God. And the thing that she talked about as well was something I'd never heard of it, hyperfocus. And I thought, that's exactly what happens to me. Like, I can be incredibly focused on one thing. So for example, I've run events and things like that, and I obsess, it's in my mind day, night, before I go to bed, first thing in the morning. And I can be so hyper focused on this particular project. I forget to eat. I don't go shopping. I don't do any washing. There's no food in the cupboards. And it's almost like my brain can't focus on that. And then I always have to push this other stuff to the side. And I just get completely in that thing that I'm doing. And that phrase, it was just like, oh my goodness, that I think that really hit home, this concept of hyperfocus alongside a complete inability to focus on. And I think as well, like, since May last year, I'd kind of made this decision to try and go self-employed, and it's just, sort of very difficult. It's work experiences and things like that. honestly, every day I just feel, I can end up just feeling completely demoralized. Like I can't, how do you, people say just focus on one thing. I'm like, what do you mean focus on one thing? Like my brain's going unless I'm in that hyper-focus mode. So that's what started the journey for me to look into it and realize it was much bigger than this sort of hyper behavior.
Yeah, that's interesting, because memory, issues with memory is a big thing with ADHD. Hyperfocus, as you've just said, and then that kind of executive function, ability to make decisions and deal with a few things going on at once. A big aspect of it. We've also got that like inability to concentrate and fidgeting thing, which are the more common ones. Now, I've found Google very helpful. I've found podcasting very helpful in getting me to where I am now. But someone said to me, a few people have said to me, have you got ADHD in recent years? And you kind of laugh it off, don't you? And you go, no, I teach kids. I'm a teacher. I teach kids who've got ADHD who can't sit still. I'm not like that. And my mate said to me once, he said, I reckon I've got ADHD. I've diagnosed himself on the internet. Like, he said, I'm not bothered. It doesn't really change it. And so I went on the internet and did an ADHD test, and I got like 8 out of the 10 things. And I just put it to the back of my mind. But it was only when I had issues in a relationship. And one of the other big things, which is a trait of ADHD, is difficulty with relationships. Because ADHD people, I don't think we're easy to live with. I think other people get on our nerves by doing things which completely fly against our coping mechanisms. So I'll come up with coping mechanisms, which to others might think, well, what the hell are you doing that for? If they don't honor that, they're taking away my coping mechanism, and then I really struggle. Now, in the past, I couldn't say, oh, listen, this really helps me. Because I've got ADHD, and in future I can say that, but I didn't know that in the past. And that's been hard. The other thing as well is, apparently people with ADHD, we're always looking for an emotional kind of reward. In relationships, when they hit a difficult patch, you can just be thinking, sack it, because we like to sack things off. We're not good at holding jobs down either. And we often have problems with that kind of sticking to a job. And you've gone self-employed. Now, we'll put details of your comedy club and your night, etc. But I just want to say as well, you've got an amazing voice. And when I first heard you at a Hope Street meeting, you came and introduced it because you spoke to Dom and Sheila at Hope Street about your mental health journey. And you came and spoke, and you did like a bit of comedy with us, and we were all laughing our heads off. But I said, I've heard your voice. And you said before, people keep saying this to you, but I think your voice, you've got like a voice like, a famous Shakespearean actress or actor or whatever. There's just something about your voice that says, I've heard your voice before. It sounds really boss. So I think it's great that you're doing your comedy. And, obviously we'll share details to help you to do that. But the other thing as well is, another trait of ADHD is we don't take criticism very well. And you're saying that you're setting up your own business. How hard's that been with that uncertainty? Do you think that is you've already mentioned this to a degree, but how difficult you finding that?
I'm finding it incredibly difficult, and there's so many times I just feel like sacking it off. I'll just go back just to say quickly on my voice, like I wonder if like the 30 years that I've been smoking as helped. That's the one benefit. It's just incredible. Like I make all these plans, I have all these different charts, I try all these different like methods to keep me on task. And I can kind of do that for like a week or so, and then I'm right off task again. And also I think something that I'm sort of learning a bit about ADD as well is you can't work out what priorities are. So everything's a priority, and you can't, so it's like everything feels as urgent as everything else. So it's incredibly difficult for me to kind of go, that's okay, you can just do that later, focus on this today. Or so everything has this kind of urgency, which makes, and then I just get really tired. And although I don't necessarily have that hyperactive, I do find it difficult to sit still and just do my work, because, and what I try all sorts of different tactics, like timers. I have a lot of timers on the phone, and like, I do find that works if I set it for an hour, and then it's like I can sort of walk around, have a fag, you know, like going back to what you were saying about that other side, you know, all these things that I'm sort of learning about, the lack of like dopamine, hence the need for these kind of highs all the time. And that's been my whole life. So, you know, and obviously comedy is a massive dopamine hit when it works. And like, you know, sort of performance stuff, or, you know, and like I have, you know, and again, like I remember reading something or hearing something about the tendency for ADHD people to have drinking issues and smoking issues, because it's the only thing that keeps them sort of centered and being able to engage and focus and stuff. So, you know, those sort of addictive tendencies have always been a challenge that I'm always trying to kind of manage.
Do you think do you rely on caffeine and tea and coffee to get you through the day? Apparently that's meant to be quite important for ADHD to get you through the day.
Yeah,
do you find
definitely.
Yeah.
Because I get like, because along with the sort of my head going in so many different places, it's this absolute exhaustion. But I guess that is the thing. If your head is never resting, it is very tiring. And like, I was just randomly looking at, you know, like you do on your phone, and there was something about just some article I was reading that said such and such and such and such. I said, oh, and you know, on average, people have something like 8 to 10 thoughts a minute. And I nearly had a panic attack. I was like, what? Well, what the hell is wrong with me? Because that's ridiculous. You know, like I must have 50 thoughts a minute, you know, it's like.
Yeah, it is tiring though, isn't it? Because, I mean, I gave up drinking. I've got a genetic illness as well, which makes things a bit more complicated. So I actually gave up drinking in 2008, and I don't do it. And I have coffee, that's about it. But I do need to get me hits from somewhere. And just like going through the day, you're always looking for something, aren't you? Like a distraction or something exciting. I found mindfulness very helpful. I found meditation very helpful. I found exercise very helpful. And one of the things I found really useful, I have a work list, which is things to do in work as a teacher. And I have a private list of things I need to do. And what I do is for each day I put an asterisk saying, I need to do that today. I still struggle, but I found that useful. There are coping mechanisms to help. But the other thing I find is that I'm never content. I always feel like this is not good enough or whatever. I'm my own worst enemy. And I know that I'm my own worst critic, and trying to ameliorate my own self-criticism is the key thing for me. I do feel like I'm at a stage now where I can quite happily say to other people, I'm not bothered what you think or what society thinks. And I know that you might say, oh, that's irresponsible when you've got to pay the bills, but I do feel I'm better at saying that's okay. I need to do what I need to do. I do feel like, because I'm making a lot of big changes in my life at the moment. So, as I said earlier, I'm a teacher, and we're trained to look out for certain things, and we can do referrals, SEND referrals, special educational needs and disabilities referrals to the SEND department, who may then do investigations. There's a lot of politics and funding implications. Parents sometimes pick up on things. You might speak to the school, you might go to the GP. Me and you, we've used our experience as adults and thought, wait there, internet, speaking to people, and then we investigate it further. But is there anything that you find, looking back at your youth, that kind of, obviously, hindsight's a wonderful thing. I look back at a lot of my life now and go, this explains that. But is there anything that you remember from your youth that was particularly stark in relation to ADHD?
one of the things that I've sort of like, you know, like I said, obviously very sort of very difficult engaging with education, and just being, I think when I sort of look back, I mean, there was a lot of very sort of hardcore traumatic things that happened to me sort of between like sort of 13 and 19. And I was sort of using alcohol, and there was all sorts of different elements. But when I look back, finding it incredibly sort of difficult and painful to see the level of sort of vulnerability I had, that I just didn't seem to understand the normal, you know, kids are vulnerable, all kids are vulnerable, but it's like an excessive level of vulnerability that, you know, like just almost just walking in oblivious into situations and having sort of terrible things happen, and then not understanding that, and then sort of going back into these sort of you know, as if, you know, and actually when I've looked back, almost finding that quite unbearable to look at. I think, how, like, that's like somebody with learning difficulties almost, you know, like that sort of extremity. And yeah, that has been something I really struggled to make sense of. And then again, when I looked into ADD, and I looked into it as a bigger picture, and actually there is stuff there that talks about teenagers just not picking up the cues and not assessing or being able to understand danger in the same sort of way, and being particularly vulnerable to peer pressure and there was neglect at home. And so again, that's why, you know, there's a lot of different elements to untangle in that. But even within that sort of the framework at home, it's still like, this doesn't all add up, you know. And I guess sort of put like having that understanding of, I know it's ADD, but I think in my mind I like to see it more as this concept of neurodivergence.
Yeah, definitely. And I think risk taking is a big aspect of ADHD. And certainly looking back at my life, I think that I'm not talking like stupid risks, like, you know, jumping from one skyscraper to the next or whatever, but stupid things that even afterwards I go, what the hell are you doing there? And they often say, a lot of psychologists say now that we've got lots of mini personalities within us, etc. But it's almost like there's this dominant you that just goes, whoa, is a bit of fun, is something which will just take your mind off things for a bit. Let's do it. I'm just going to take this opportunity, Claire, to read off the internet, a very brief list of ADHD in adults.
Okay,
Being late or forgetting things, anxiety, low self-esteem, problems at work, trouble controlling anger, impulsiveness, substance misuse or addiction, trouble staying organized, procrastination, easily frustrated, often bored, trouble concentrating when reading, mood swings, depression, and relationship problems. Now, I told you that I had like 8 out of 10 in this test. I was thinking, oh my God, what's going on there? But that's interesting, because so much of that can be missed if you're not looking at the bigger picture. And I think that's what the danger is. And you were talking earlier about neurodiversity. I'm going to say something now which people who know me will listen and go, yeah, that sounds like you. But, you know, like the idea of decorating your house. I'm not interested. I'm not interested. I hate it. I'd rather read a book or write a poem. And the thought of decorating a house, I'm not interested. And I just want to say that. And I think it's my ADHD. I don't care about walls and what colour they look like. I want to just read books and do exciting stuff. So I'm just getting that off my chest. But again, that's an ADHD thing, because I've had people who I live with, I've been in relationships with, when it comes to like decorating. I have done it in the past, like, don't get me wrong, but it's a bit like being in them maths lessons when I was a kid. I just don't value it. It doesn't mean a thing to me. And I understand it's important, but in nature, we didn't spend hours painting walls. So I've got that off my chest now. But it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. I was just going to say, like, when I move into a house, and I've moved around quite a bit, I don't know, you know, like, I would do, you know, this part of like not in jobs for long, not in relationships for long, not in a house for long. And when I move in, I'm absolutely obsessed with everything, like in terms of decorating, and then and like how I exactly want to look it, and I'm in the hyper focus with it, and then I'll just stop, and all the stuff's just left, and the doors are hanging off, and it's not my priority anymore.
I'm the same. When I move in somewhere, I've got the hyper focus, and then once the hyper focus is done, I feel I haven't got time for that now. I've moved on to other things.
No, there's something else. Yeah.
I'm just going to read a child with ADHD in terms of inattentive, and on this website, which I'll share actually in the notes, it talks about for children inattentive ADHD and hyperactive impulsive. So there's two different divisions. So inattentive child, easily distracted, doesn't follow directions or finish tasks, doesn't seem to be listening, doesn't pay attention and makes careless mistakes, forgets about daily activities, has problems organising daily tasks, doesn't like to do things that require sitting still, often loses things, tends to daydream. And for hyperactive impulsive, screams or fidgets, doesn't stay seated, has trouble playing quietly, is always moving, talks excessively, is always on the go, has trouble waiting for their turn, blurts out answers and interrupts others. So there's some things which may help listeners. But it is very, very tiring, isn't it? And I find that after a day, for me, like I've lived 2 days of energy. And do you know what I'm very good at, Claire? The stop button. There gets a point in the evening where I go, right, I am watching the telly and I'm reading a book and I'm not bothered about anything else. I am quite good at getting to that, but it's almost like an ejection seat rather than a part of the day when that.
Yes, because I can still do that with chaos around me, like all the things, undone jobs. I'm just like, I can't do it. I'm just going to zone out in the telly. And I find it interesting, the things that if I'm watching, like, ironically, if I'm watching something like comedy or sitcoms or something quite like lighthearted, I cannot stay focused. I drift off. I start looking at my phone. I have to watch stuff that's so absolutely like thrillers, stuff that gives me like a edge of the seat thing to keep me to stay switched off, to just do my zoning out.
Yeah, I can relate to that. My ability to read a long book. I think it is a social thing that as well. I think with the internet age and the phone age, it's got worse for me. So it's partly cultural that as well, but I definitely associate with that. Do you know the label of ADHD? I mean, ultimately, you're not ADHD, you're Claire Berry, and ADHD has helped you to understand yourself. But have you found that label helpful or not helpful? And to what extent do you think your ADHD has benefited you as well as hindered you, if you know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. I think for me, currently, there's nothing negative for me about the diagnosis.
Yeah.
It for me, and I still feel like I'm going through this process of learning and understanding, and possibly having a little bit more compassion for my sort of younger self, a little bit more compassion for me. And like, I think what you were saying earlier about you sort of then you start to understand your strengths and weaknesses better, and therefore it's like you can sort of acknowledge your strengths more and also acknowledge your weaknesses without it being like, why can't you do that? Why can't I just do that thing? Whereas perhaps now it's kind of like, okay, I understand that those things are really hard and I need a little bit of help, and trying to remind myself my executive functionings don't work properly. It's given me a little bit of like my daughter, who's only she's just turned 12. So I've explained to her I've got the diagnosis as well. And I think that might help her understand, because, my struggle with my memory or forgetting things, or almost sort of saying, I do need you to help a little bit more with things, because that I don't remember these things. That I've forgotten to just wash your school socks, or so I think, I would say overall it's a positive. But I suppose I have like my thoughts on the idea that because society, like you were talking before, like about the maths lesson and the sort of feel, and when creatives are sort of can't be creative, and when you said that, I could really feel that, because I really relate to it in certain jobs where I felt straight jacketed, and it's painful. It's actually painful. But as a society, neurotypical is the norm. What we decide, what we've made a decision is normal, and if you're not neurotypical, then you're not normal. But that's just a complete societal construct in a way. So you could argue that ADD is a construct, if that makes sense, because you like saying your brain doesn't work on this normal scale. So it's all, in a way, it's like, it's just that society doesn't bend towards people that think in a slightly different way, have strengths in a different way. Society is not really interested, so therefore we've kind of got a label.
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of understanding yourself. I always go back to what Yuval Harari said. I don't know if you've read any of his books. He's brilliant.
No.
But he said that first of all, you need to know yourself. Then you can better yourself, and then you can join groups with others that you believe in accordance with your values. And I always remember that. I think understanding that there's something called ADHD that can help you to understand yourself without having the letters ADHD tattooed on your head as a restrictor, that you can say, right, that now explains my world to some extent. And as you say, it's almost like the rule of the majority, because a lot of the kids, I've got to watch what I say here, but I would say that the school system let a lot of kids down with this one size fits all kind of Fordist, Taylorist idea that was reinforced outrageously by Michael Gove in the early teens. And when he became education secretary and all this going back to the basics nonsense, I remember just thinking, all those kids you're writing off who were going to struggle with that. It really angered me at the time, and it angers me even more now. But it's how, if you read the UN Declaration of Human Rights, how is that serving the interests of people, forcing them through systems that are one size fits all? Workplaces that are one size fits all. And you can go on and go, oh yeah, be open with your boss and say, we all know the reality of work, that if you go in and say, oh, by the way, can you start doing A, B, C, D, E, F, G to make my life easier? And a lot of workplaces will look at you and go, you need to go or whatever. But it's a human right to be educated and to be treated in accordance with your needs. And I think a lot of people who are neurodiverse are let down. And, you know, if I could go back to my younger self, I've often thought about this. If I go back to my younger self, I'd just hug me and go, you're not the problem. I'd say, listen, mate, you're not the problem here. Just like, you know, I'd probably give this individual a few little pointers, but I'll probably just say, don't worry, you're not at fault. Because I used to think there's something wrong with me all the time. And now I realise that I was just operating at a different level. You know,
I actually did teach training like a long time ago as a drama teacher. And I did complete my PGCE, and there was you know, part of why I just couldn't bear the system. I just could not bear it. It made me feel so uncomfortable in my own experiences, and ironically, like the icing on the cake of why I never went into it was that they just brought in these tests that you had to do, which was really strange, because they were like these 3 tests, like ICT. Have you heard of these? ICT,
maths, English, ICT.
In maths and English, but they're on a very specific program. So not even a program you'd never, like the ICT one is it's not Word or anything. It's like, anyways, you had to just, you know, it's a tick box exercise. And I managed the English and I managed the ICT, but the maths was mental arithmetic. And I've never been able to learn my times table. I mean, I believe I'm actually phobic around maths. If somebody says, can you add 12 and 8, I'll just panic.
Yeah.
And then it would take me a while to work it out. So I knew that there was absolutely no way I was going to pass this mental arithmetic test. I tried a couple of times, tried like 3 times, and I just I don't even understand why you're asking me to do this. I'm teaching drama.
That's an example, in my opinion, of systemic discrimination. That's what it is. There's no other word for it. And again, that all came from, we don't seem to be doing well in international league tables. Let's make it even harder for teachers to become. Just absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
But again, that boils me blood. I mean, I would pass all them 3.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. That's not the point. You're a drama teacher. You know what I mean? Yeah. And if you're going to teach drama, then why is that important? And this is another thing as I grow older, I often find that just doing stuff. Imagine someone said to you as an adult, learn this, and you didn't value it. You'd be like, I'm not learning that.
Yeah,
you expect young people to do it, you know what I mean?
I know, yeah.
Shocking. What advice would you give to someone who's got ADHD or suspects they have?
That was the question when I was looking at the questions, that I thought, I'm not very good at advice, me. I'm more of a sort of, a listener, if you know what I mean. I think probably a little bit of what we've been talking about is that it's not, I think the thing would be to not, if you've got that diagnosis, that's not, there's something wrong with you. That's that you're a bit different than what is expected or what we as a society, and that it's kind of like, I would say, try and celebrate that difference. It's like, ADHD, is rampant in the comedy community. It's because it's it's a massive dopamine kind of thing. And, for me, I don't really have any friends, that many friends that are neurotypical, because I'm drawn to, I find, people that are, ADD or anything in that spectrum, just so much more interesting to connect with and have those really intense conversations. And so I suppose it's just about almost take it with a pinch of salt as what society says it is, but an opportunity to just perhaps be just kinder to ourselves of why things have been tough in the past or why they're tough in the present. And just give ourselves a bit of a break about that.
I think in the podcast notes, I'll put the link to that website with the different kind of symptoms of ADHD for children and adults. I'll include details of your comedy stuff and your Facebook, your website, and that venue as well. But the voice, Claire Berry, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to say just before we finish? I've learned a lot from you in this, and I've learned a lot about myself, and there'll be a lot of people out there who may be ADHD or might have kids or whatever. And you might say, well, I'm a little bit like that or whatever. You might know other people, but I think we just need to open this debate up and just understand each other and not be afraid as well to use the internet, go to the GP, ask the school and say, listen, would it help if this, can we do tests? Is there a way that we can find out something? Because then we help those people to be more valued and for ourselves to be more valued. So, that's what I'm looking to do with this. But thanks very much for being so open and frank. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. I
just want to say as well, I heard something quite interesting recently by a guy talking about mindfulness, and he said, every day we experience something called a micro stress event. And he said, and when these add up, you've only got so much of it you can take. And sometimes that cup fills up very quickly. And that leads to a stress response and a stressful day. And I think for people who are neurodiverse, I think our cups fill up very quickly sometimes.
Yes, very much so, yeah.
I think there's a lot of people out there who may not be ADHD who experience similar things because they're neurodiverse, or they might have a particular adverse childhood experience that has affected them. Whoever you are, if you are struggling day to day, there's nothing necessarily wrong with you.
Yeah.
You just need to find out why. And I just say to people, get curious about yourself and know yourself. Once you know yourself, which you'll never truly know yourself because no one can truly know themselves, but then you can seek to better yourself, understand yourself, and then you can. But by speaking to you, doing this podcast, I think we're getting a very important message out there. So, Claire, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. It's been really lovely to talk, and it's sometimes that thing, isn't it, when even when you're actually talking, you go, oh yeah.
It reaffirms for yourself because you have a lot of stuff floating through your head, and when you say it yourself, it helps you to understand it. Follow us at North Podcast on Twitter out there, folks. You can support me on coffee.com. If you want to get involved, come on board, help in any way, feel free. Please like, share, spread the word, and thank you for giving up your valuable time to listen to me rambling on. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just one little postscript. Claire and I didn't discuss ADHD medications, but there are a range available which you can try out. It's very much trial and error with ADHD. Claire was given a particular stimulant which she said actually made her feel worse, so she hasn't been taking it. But the journey for ADHD medication and getting the right one can be quite long, and as I said before, trial and error. But I will look to do that again in another podcast, look at the medication side of it with maybe someone else who's had different experiences. Thank you.